My name is Nadia Okafor-Briggs. I am 39 years old. I was pushed out of my family's real estate company at 25, politely, carefully, with all the right words, and told I was not ready for the work I had already been doing for 3 years. My father built that company. My father signed the letter. I took the letter home, folded it, and put it in the back of a notebook I kept in my desk drawer. On the cover of that notebook, I wrote 4 words, "Things I will not forget." 12 years later, the largest deal my family's company had ever attempted required an independent appraisal. The bank hired the best firm they could find on their qualified vendor list. My name is on the door of that firm. And the number I submitted, honest, documented, peer-reviewed, was the number that changed everything. What I did not do, not once, in the 11 days between receiving that engagement letter and submitting that report, was make it personal. That was, I think, the most precise decision I have ever made. Before I go any further, if this is the kind of story you stay for, hit subscribe and drop a like. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps more than you know. And I want to hear where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments right now. I'll be reading them. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Back to Atlanta. Back to a boardroom I walked out of 14 years ago, and the wall I could never stop thinking about. The Briggs Development Group office occupied the top floor and a half of a midtown Atlanta tower that my father had financed at 38 years old with 2 investor partners and what he always called clean hunger, meaning he was ambitious but not reckless, not yet. By the time I was in high school, the company had developed 14 commercial properties across Georgia and Tennessee. By the time I joined the firm at 22, that number was 19. The office smelled like cold air and old carpet and the particular kind of quiet that exists in places where people are performing confidence for each other all day. The coffee in the break room was always burnt because someone had left the carafe on the burner too long, and no one ever turned it off because turning it off was not the kind of thing people at Briggs Development concerned themselves with. There were assistants for that. My father's office had a window that faced south, and on clear mornings the light came in flat and direct and made everything look like evidence. He liked it that way. He was a man who believed in visibility, in being seen, in seeing clearly, in making sure the right people were in the right rooms. The question of who belonged in which room was one he had opinions about that he expressed through movement rather than words. He did not tell you that you did not belong somewhere. He simply arranged the furniture of your life until you found yourself standing outside. My brother Trey, 3 years older than me, ran operations. He had my father's ease with a room, the handshake, the lean-in, the laugh that arrived right on time. He was good at the business. I want to say that clearly. Trey knew how to run a site meeting and how to keep a contractor from going over budget and how to read a room full of investors at a dinner and know which one was about to walk. He was genuinely skilled. What he was not was precise about numbers. I am precise about numbers. I have been since I was 12 years old, sitting in my Aunt Constance's living room in Charlotte while she walked me through a loan file for Strip Mall in Gastonia, pointing to the cap rate, the NOI, the debt service coverage, explaining each figure with the patience of someone who had spent 30 years watching people not understand what they were signing. "You feel this," she told me, tapping my temple lightly with one finger. "You don't just read it. You feel it. That is a gift, and it will take you somewhere if you let it." I let it take me to a desk at Briggs Development 3 years after I graduated from Georgia Tech with a degree in real estate and a minor in finance. I spent those 3 years doing what my father suggested, working under a commercial appraiser in Decatur, building my hours toward my MAI designation, learning the methodology that would eventually become my entire professional life. When I joined the firm, I thought I was coming home. The boardroom on the 14th floor had a wall. A full wall, floor to ceiling, covered in framed aerial photographs of every significant property the company had developed. 22 properties by then. I had done the preliminary site analysis and valuation work on 6 of them during my 3 years there. I had stayed late. I had pulled comps at 11 at night. I had flagged a soil contamination issue on one site that would have cost the company $400,000 if we had missed it. The plaques beneath each aerial photograph listed the development team, the lead developer, the architect, the general contractor, the project manager. My name appeared on none of them. I noticed this the first week I was at the firm. I noticed it the way you notice a chip in a piece of china you use every day. You don't mention it because mentioning it would require you to acknowledge how long you've been pretending not to see it. Constance Okafor drove from Charlotte twice a year for what she called inspections of me, of my work, of whether I was being treated correctly. She was not dramatic about it. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and kept a legal pad in her handbag and asked the kinds of questions that made you realize afterward that she had already known the answers before she asked them. The Christmas I was 24, she sat across from me at my parents' dining room table during the gap between dinner and dessert, when the men had moved to the living room and my mother was in the kitchen, and she said, very quietly, "Who is getting credit for your work?" I told her the projects were collaborative. She looked at me over the top of her glasses the way she looked at a loan file that had been structured to obscure something. That's not what I asked. I told her about the wall, the plaques, the 6 properties. She did not react with outrage. She picked up her legal pad and wrote something down. I asked her what she was writing. She said, "I'm just keeping track." She said it the way someone says it when they mean something much larger than those 4 words. I didn't fully understand what she meant at the time. She went back to Charlotte the next morning. She called me in February to check in. She called in March. In April, she called to tell me that she had been reading about the MAI designation and that she believed I should pursue full certification independently, not through the firm's continuing education track. Own your credential, she said. Don't let them count it as a company asset. 6 months later, my father called me into his office on a Tuesday afternoon and told me that the company was restructuring the analytical function, that they were going to bring in someone with deeper development relationships, that I was talented. He said this specifically, carefully, but that the direction of the company required a different kind of profile in that seat. He said I should go out on my own. He said he would support that. He said it like he was handing me a gift. I sat in that office for the length of that conversation, and I said very little. I asked twice for clarification on the timeline. I took notes. On my way out, I stopped in front of the wall of aerial photographs. I looked at the 6 properties I had worked. I read the plaques. I turned and walked to the elevator. That night, I called Constance. She did not say I'm sorry. She said, "I was wondering when this would happen."
She paused.
Then she said, "I want you to take $20,000 from me. I want you to build something they will have to call on someday." She said it like a prophecy. Not a comfort. A prophecy. I took the money. I opened Briggs Okafor Group 18 months later. I chose the hyphen deliberately because my mother's name belonged on the door of something that was mine. Constance kept a file drawer in her Charlotte home office. I didn't know this until last Christmas, when she opened it to show me. The label on the front read, Nadia, Professional. Inside, my firm announcement, my MAI designation letter, 3 industry profiles, every award mention, every major deal closed, each one annotated in her handwriting with a plain language explanation of what it meant. She had written herself a summary of my entire career, so she could explain it accurately to anyone who asked. She told me she had shown it to no one. I just wanted to make sure somebody was paying attention, she said. Somebody always should be. The engagement letter arrived on a Tuesday in October. My office manager brought it in with the rest of the morning correspondence. I was on a call. I set it aside. When I finished the call, I picked it up. The retaining bank was a regional institution I knew by reputation. Conservative underwriters, strict conflict protocols, the kind of lender that hired appraisers based on credential and track record rather than relationship. The engagement was for a $340 million mixed-use portfolio acquisition in Charlotte. 12 properties. The acquiring entity was listed on the second page. Briggs Development Group. I put the letter down on my desk. I looked at it. I picked it up again and read the acquiring entity name a second time because I have learned over 12 years that the feeling of certainty and the reality of certainty are not always the same thing. They were the same thing. I called my general counsel within the hour. We reviewed the conflict disclosure protocol. Because I held no ownership stake in Briggs Development, I had signed no non-compete, held no equity, carried no financial interest in the company or its transactions, and because the bank had selected my firm independently through a vendor list, the engagement was legally and ethically clean. My GC said, and I remember this precisely, The conflict protocol exists to protect the integrity of the number. You followed it. Your job now is to protect the integrity of the number. I called Constance that evening. She was quiet for a long moment after I told her. Then she said, "Well, that is something." Another pause. "Do the best appraisal you have ever done." I told her I intended to. I assigned 2 senior appraisers to the engagement alongside me. I did not tell them whose acquisition it was. I told them the engagement required our best work and our most rigorous documentation. They are professional people. That was enough. The site visits to Charlotte began in the 3rd week of October. On the 3rd visit, I was reviewing exterior conditions on a mixed-use building in South End when I heard my name. Dennis Ford, project manager. I had worked alongside him during my 3 years at Briggs Development. He was one of the good ones, precise, unglamorous, the kind of person who showed up early and left after the work was done. He waved from across the parking lot. We got coffee. He didn't know I was the appraiser on the deal. Why would he? My firm's name was on the engagement, not my face. We caught up the way people do when years have passed and there's no bad blood and no reason to be careful. He asked about the firm. I told him it was good. He asked what brought me to Charlotte. I told him I had an engagement in the area. He nodded, accepting it, and then, because Dennis has always been someone who thinks out loud when he's concerned about something, he said, "I'll tell you, I'm a little nervous about this Charlotte deal. Gerald's been telling the board it's a sure thing. Says he's got relationships with the anchor tenants. Says the internal valuations are conservative." He stirred his coffee. "Between you and me, I think they padded the occupancy projections. Not lying, exactly, but optimistic in a way that makes the numbers look better than I think they are." He said it the way someone shares a concern over coffee, not the way someone confesses to a crime. He wasn't alarmed. He was just a precise man who had noticed something imprecise and had nowhere useful to put it. I finished my coffee. I thanked him. I drove back to the hotel and opened my laptop. I pulled every lease abstract in the portfolio, every occupancy report, every tenant credit file, every renewal option, every co-tenancy clause, every anchor tenant's financial disclosure. Dennis was right. The occupancy projections assumed renewal rates that were not supported by the lease terms. 2 anchor tenants had co-tenancy clauses that would allow them to exit or renegotiate if occupancy fell below a threshold the portfolio was already approaching. The internal team's valuations had used a cap rate that reflected stabilized, fully occupied assets. These were not stabilized, fully occupied assets. A less experienced appraiser, someone doing their first major mixed-use engagement, someone who trusted the seller's pro forma without stress testing it, would have gotten close to the internal number. The deal would have closed, and Briggs Development would have overpaid by somewhere between $18 and $20 million. I adjusted my models. I ran the comparables again. I had my 2 senior appraisers run them independently and reconcile with me. Our number was honest. It was also $22 million below what Briggs Development had told the bank to expect. I submitted it on a Friday morning. I signed my name to it. Then I went home. I want to stop here for a second and ask you something directly. Have you ever been in a position where doing the right thing was going to cost someone you love something real? Where the honest answer and the easy answer were not the same answer, and you knew that choosing honesty meant a phone call you did not want to receive? If you've been there, type the number in the comments right now. I want to know how many of you have been in that room. Because what happened on Monday morning, when my father figured out who had submitted that appraisal, that is where this story becomes something else entirely. I did not wait for the call unprepared. On Friday afternoon, after the report was submitted, I sat in my car in the parking deck beneath my building for 17 minutes. I did not go back upstairs. I just sat. I thought about the wall, the 22 aerial photographs, the 6 properties with plaques that did not have my name on them. I thought about Dennis's face across a coffee shop table, stirring his cup, worried about something he couldn't fix. I thought about my father's voice, the controlled version, the one that sounds like concern but is constructed from authority, and I rehearsed not what I would say, but how I would breathe. I am not made of stone. I want to be clear about that. There was a version of that Friday night where I sat on the floor of my bathroom and felt the full weight of what was coming, not guilt, because I had done nothing wrong, but grief. The particular grief of being loved imperfectly by someone who is not capable of loving you the way you need to be loved and who will never fully understand what they cost you. That grief is real. I have carried it for 14 years. I sat with it that Friday night, and I let it be present, and I did not push it away. Then I stood up. I reviewed my documentation one more time Saturday morning, not because it needed review, but because precision is the only armor I have ever trusted. I called my GC to confirm the conflict disclosure trail was clean and dated. I pulled the 12 comparable transactions I had used to anchor my valuation. I wrote out, in bullet points on a legal pad, exactly what I would say if someone challenged the methodology. Then I put the legal pad in my briefcase. I called Constance Sunday evening and told her to expect that something might surface this week. She asked if I was ready. I told her I had been ready since I was 25 years old and just didn't know it yet. She laughed. Then she was quiet. Then she said, "The number is always more honest than the room it's delivered into." I wrote it down. By Monday morning, I was at my desk by 7:15. I was on my second cup of coffee when the phone rang at 11:43. I knew his number before I answered. I let it ring 3 times. Not as a power move, just as a breath. Nadia. His voice was the version I had known since childhood, the measured one, the one that lives in the register just below anger, where a man who has built something large and valuable keeps his displeasure because he knows that losing control of his voice means losing control of the room. It was a voice designed to remind you of the size of what he had built and your smallness relative to it. It did not work the way it used to. "Dad," I said. He did not acknowledge the word. He moved directly into the thing. He said I had undervalued the portfolio. He said my number would kill an acquisition the company had spent 18 months building. He said I clearly did not understand the market dynamics in Charlotte. He said each of these things in sequence, evenly, the way you make a case to someone you believe you can still bring around. I waited until he was finished. My methodology, I said, is fully documented. It was peer-reviewed within the firm before submission. It is supported by 12 comparable transactions that I am happy to walk through with any reviewer the bank chooses to appoint. He said I was doing this to settle old scores. I sat very still at my desk. Through my office window, I could see the Atlanta skyline, flat and bright in the November morning. I thought about the notebook in my drawer. Things I will not forget. I thought about it, and then I put the thought down. "Gerald," I said. Not Dad. "Gerald. I have not settled a score in 12 years. I have been building a firm." He was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "I know because I was watching the clock on my wall." He said I was too close to this. Too emotionally involved to be objective. He said there was a reason independent appraisers had to be truly independent, meaning not the daughter of the principal, not someone with a history, not someone who might have a reason to want the number to look a certain way. I let him finish. "I disclosed the relationship," I said. "To you, that is the bank." To the bank, before I accepted the engagement. The conflict protocol was reviewed and cleared. I did not select this engagement. The bank's procurement team selected my firm from a qualified vendor list. I have no ownership interest in Briggs Development. My number is my number because it is what the assets are worth. There was a long silence. The kind of silence that happens when someone who has always held the authority in a room realizes the room has shifted. He said, "This is not over." Short sentences. I used them deliberately. "The report," I said, "has already been submitted." A pause. "It is over." He hung up. I set my phone face down on my desk. My hands were steady. The clock said 11:51. 8 minutes. That is how long the conversation lasted. I picked up my legal pad. I drew a single line through the bullet points I had written on Saturday. Every one of them had been used. I went to the break room. I poured out the old coffee and made a fresh pot. I stood there while it brewed, and I looked out the window at the parking lot below, and I thought about Constance saying build something they will have to call on someday, not as prophecy anymore, but as fact. Just a fact that had taken 14 years to arrive. I poured my coffee. I went back to my desk. I had 3 other engagements to return calls on. The bank ordered a second independent appraisal. This is standard practice when a number comes in significantly below seller expectations on a transaction this size. I expected it. I would have ordered it myself. The second firm took 3 weeks. They came in within 4% of my number. 4%. On a $340 million portfolio. That is the margin of professional agreement between two firms that had never spoken to each other, working from the same public data. The deal was renegotiated. Briggs Development closed the acquisition. They did close it. I want to be clear about that, but at a purchase price that required restructuring their financing and extending their equity commitment. The terms were not what my father had presented to his board as a sure thing. He did not call me again. Not for 5 months. The bank's senior lending officer sent me a note in January. Not an email. A handwritten note on the institution's letterhead, 3 sentences long. She said my work on the engagement had been thorough and professionally rigorous. She said my firm would be added to their preferred vendor list for commercial appraisal work in the Southeast. She said she looked forward to working with us. I framed it. Not on my wall of engagements, that is for completion letters. In the small office off the conference room, where I keep the things that are just for me. The professional network works the way it works. By the second quarter of the following year, 2 of the bank's other commercial clients had requested proposals from Briggs Okafor Group. Neither of them knew the Briggs family. They knew the number. Word in this industry moves slowly and then all at once. And what moved was a single phrase. Nadia Okafor Briggs is the appraiser you hire when the number has to be right. I heard it third hand, the same way I had once heard Trey tell a mutual contact that my firm did residential work. I wrote it down in the same notebook. Trey called in month 6, not to apologize, to ask if I would consider doing appraisal work for the family company on future acquisitions. He said it the way someone offers a thing they believe is large, carefully, with the weight of favor built into the phrasing. I took 3 days before I responded, not because I was unsure. Because I wanted to respond from clarity, not reaction. I told him I would consider engagement with Briggs Development on a standard commercial basis. Full independence protocols. No preferential pricing and no preferential access. The same terms I would offer any client. He said, "That's not how family works." I said, "It's how I work." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he would think about it. He has not called back. I have not followed up. The door is neither open nor closed. It is simply there, and whether he walks through it is his decision, not mine. My mother came to Atlanta in February. Not for a family occasion, just to come. She brought food and she sat at my kitchen table, and she did not talk about the deal for the first 2 hours. Then, when the food was mostly gone and the conversation had moved through 3 other subjects, she said quietly, "Your father knows what he did to you. He has known for a while. He does not have the language for it yet. I don't know if he ever will." She was not excusing him. She was explaining him. "There is a difference. You did not do anything wrong," she said. "Not 12 years ago, and not now. I need you to know that I know that." That was the reckoning. Not a confrontation. Not a negotiation. Just my mother at my kitchen table, saying the thing that needed to be said without performance or apology. I said, "I know, Mama." She patted my hand once, and then changed the subject to my cousin's new apartment in Houston, and that was it. That was the whole thing. It was enough. 14 months after the engagement letter arrived on my desk, Briggs Okafor Group has 17 people. I opened the second office in Charlotte in March, specifically in the building where 3 of the acquired portfolio properties are located, because I find it useful, professionally and personally, to work where the work was done. To be able to look out the window at the asset and know exactly what it is worth and why. Constance drove from her house for the opening. She brought a Norfolk pine in a terracotta pot and a card in a yellow envelope. The card said, on the front, "I told you so." On the inside, in her handwriting, "With love, always. C." The plant is in the corner of my Charlotte office. I water it on Thursdays. The Briggs Development boardroom wall in Midtown Atlanta has not changed, as far as I know. I have not been back to see it. I have been back to Atlanta, obviously, I live there. But I have not had occasion to stand in front of those plaques again, and I find I do not need to. I have my own wall. In the conference room at the Atlanta office, there are no aerial photographs. There is a single row of framed appraisal completion letters, the firm's 20 largest engagements, each one matted and framed with the property address and the engagement date below. 12 years of deals, I was told, I was not ready to handle. The Charlotte engagement letter is in the center of the row. I chose the frame myself, dark wood, clean lines, nothing extra. Just the letter, the address, the date. I walk past it every morning on my way to my desk. Some mornings I stop. Most mornings I don't need to. The knowing is enough now, the quiet, permanent knowing that the work was real and the number was right, and my name is on the door. I'm going to tell you what I actually learned from this, not what I think you should take from it. I learned that precision is the only power that cannot be argued with. You can argue with ambition. You can undermine relationships. You can dismiss credentials and minimize presence and reframe someone's contributions as incidental. But you cannot argue with a number that is correct. You can challenge it, and they did, and it will survive the challenge because it was built to survive it. I also learned that the people who push you out of a room rarely understand that they have handed you a reason to build a better one. My father thought he was making a practical decision 14 years ago. He was just making it about the wrong thing, about comfort, about his network's preferences, about not having a difficult conversation with people whose opinions he valued more than he valued honesty. I do not think he is a cruel man. I think he is a man who took the easier path so many times that he stopped noticing the paths he was closing for other people. That is a specific kind of damage. It does not require malice. It just requires choosing convenience over integrity again and again, until the choices accumulate into something that looks like a wall. I built a door in that wall. That is all. If something in this story landed for you, if you have been the person whose name was left off the plaque, whose work was absorbed into someone else's credit, who was told they were not ready when the truth was something else entirely, I want to hear it. Tell me your version in the comments. Not the polished version. The real one. I'm Nadia Okafor-Briggs. 12 years ago, I was the woman my family's company let go. Today, I am the appraiser they had to call. Subscribe if this story was worth your time. Share it with someone who needs it. And there's a link in the description for anyone who wants to go deeper. I'll see you in the next one.